Dr. Dolsten is the President, Worldwide Research and Development of Pfizer, and Pfizer is the lead sponsor of today's program. You can read more about Dr. Dolsten in your program booklet, but please welcome him now for his remarks. Mikael.
Thank you for the introduction, Mary. And it's a great opportunity to share with you some thoughts concerning what has really been major breakthroughs of the past and thinking through into the future, as I think the next panel will be about imagining where science and medicine can advance. When I think about the most impactful scientific advances of the past 3 decades, or even maybe the past century, the first thing that comes to my mind are vaccines. Vaccines are often called the greatest public health intervention of all times. Diseases that once decimated and crippled entire populations, such as smallpox, have been basically eradicated, or in the case of polio, are a distant memory of many and unknown to younger generation. More recently, scientific insights have enabled the delivery of vaccines to help protect against pneumococcal disease, rotavirus, HPV, and shingles. Just look at the breadth and impact of vaccines. It benefits not only the vaccinated individuals, but society as a whole. It can reduce healthcare spend, keep people out of hospitals, prevent potential lifelong disease side effects that can be devastating, and free up critical and limited health resources. And a study estimated that $1 spent on vaccines may save $10 in healthcare. Importantly, in these times of antibiotic-resistant bugs, vaccines can reduce the need of antibiotics and reduce the prevalence of multi-resistant strains. The WHO estimates that vaccines prevented at least 10 million deaths between 2010 and 2015 and protected millions of lives from suffering and disability of diseases such as pneumonia, diarrhea, whooping cough, measles, and polio. What if we could grow this impressive number with the next wave of vaccine innovation and save further millions of patients from suffering or difficult fatal outcomes? Yet, today, I believe we are in danger of losing the focus of vaccines for a number of reasons, which is kind of surprising that we would lose that focus after this tremendous success of the past. The first is the fact that we unfortunately are living in an age where science denialism is quite common, where fact-based science is often overlooked or ignored altogether, whether related to vaccines or climate change. We're suffering from a severe and critical case of what the Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman called confirmation bias. This bias is pervasive and extremely dangerous, and as shown by the anti-vaccine movement. Between January through June this year, CDC reports that the United States has had more than 1,000 cases of measles. The most intense outbreak is happening close to my home in New York State. Who would think that would happen in 2019? Caregivers who choose not to vaccinate the children are putting others and the wider community at risk by reducing the protective effect of vaccines, called herd immunity. This poses a direct threat to vulnerable populations who are either not old enough to be immunized or have by age a poorly functioning immune system, or patients that cannot be vaccinated because they're immunocompromised by disease or medicines. Study after study confirms the lack of correlation between vaccination and autism, yet anti-vaccine suspicion seems to be at an all-time high, and as a society, we cannot seem to debunk this myth. The second issue I see is a risk to the long-term sustainability of investing in vaccines research and development. Many companies have exited not only infectious disease, but also vaccines. And currently, there are only 4 major vaccine companies with activities from research to large vaccines in the market for the public, and there are only 2 of them that are American. And while smaller biotechs are trying to take on the difficult task of vaccines, we need entire value chain to be present. There is a dire need to increase investments in vaccines and manufacturing to take on new diseases or extend the coverage of existing vaccines. This type of investment can only be made by companies if we see the opportunity for growing and supportive patient uptake. And at times, there appears to be a misalignment of public health priorities between FDA and CDC, making it more difficult for industry to predict the potential return of investment or access to patients for these vital products and focus resources in the best way. Let me share a story to illustrate this. In 2013, as a response to what you may remember, university-based outbreaks of meningococcal disease in the US caused by serogroup B, and there was no vaccine available in the marketplace, Pfizer responded to the request of the US FDA to fast-track our meningitis B vaccine candidate and tried to get it approved as quickly as possible in a completely different procedure than we had ever experienced, which led to talents working endless hours to try and respond to this need. And in October 2014, the US FDA granted Pfizer accelerated approval of this vaccine called Trememba to protect from meningococcal group B vaccines that can cause fatal outcome or devastating lifelong suffering for adolescents and young adults. Despite this mortality and morbidity associated with meningitis B disease and the urgency from FDA where Pfizer responded to, the CDC's recommending body, ACIP, voted to give Trememba a Category B recommendation, which is for only individual decision-making between physicians and patients and not for universal usage. And while this vaccine was covered by most insurers, this category designation led to that vaccination is not required and will not be mandated by high schools or universities. And as a result, although all the efforts we put in, vaccine uptake in the US is relatively low, while the cost of all the man-hours and, of course, the funds remained high. Merck faced a similar challenge in age-related discrepancy for its herpes zoster between the FDA approval, which was for individuals over 50 years of age, where the ACIP recommended the vaccine to be used in people over 60 years of age. These mixed signals makes it very problematic for planning the development of vaccines, and particularly when the anti-vaccination sentiment is on the rise. While sponsors can have formal meetings with FDA to agree on requirement for licensure, which is very helpful, a similar platform is not available for vaccine sponsors to align with the CDC or ACIP on what criteria they are expecting for certain recommendation. The FDA has implemented in a very proactive way breakthrough designation that help us to understand the priorities for public health needs and allow us to work to accelerate such new innovations. We would welcome this type of clarity and transparency in priorities from CDC and similar proactive way of working, which would allow the best science resources in the United States to work on the vaccines that would have the highest likelihood to be available for the public in general recommendation. Well, despite all these challenges, there's never been a more exciting time to be in vaccine scientific innovation. And while industry consolidation has made us large vaccine manufacturers scarce, less than a handful of fingers, we continue to dedicate our efforts to minimize deaths and suffering from infectious diseases by developing new scientific approaches for the vaccines. And according to a recent McKinsey report, in the last 10 years, actually the vaccine pipeline has doubled between pharma and biotech to more than 300 candidates. This increase is no doubt due to the scientific and technological advances that are allowing us to focus on more complex pathogens and more technically advanced vaccines. One example is maternal immunization. And we are working to be, hopefully, the first company to license novel vaccines indicated for protection of the newborn, neonates, and infants by maternal immunization. This includes efforts such as Group B streptococcus and respiratory syncytial virus. We're also seeing new technology such as RNA vaccine technology enter to be a new, more rapid and potent way of making vaccines, particularly interesting for flu shot, to make a better flu shot and replace the historical use of egg-based or cell-based vaccine. This could offer a much more faster access to vaccines, weeks rather than many months, and hopefully also result in a more effective vaccine, as you all have experienced that the flu vaccine has been very unreliable in protection in many seasons. Many other companies are working to advance vaccine innovation that could address other chronic or difficult diseases, HIV, tuberculosis, malaria, and also Ebola. But scientific progress is futile without uptake. And it is somewhat perplexing if you compare the efforts some parents will make in lower income countries to vaccinate their kids, in contrast to efforts parents will go through to avoid vaccinating the kids in some higher income countries. I stand here now to conclude and ask you to come together and join forces to ensure that we continue to have an environment that values the impact vaccines can have on human health. Let's not take any more step back, not at a time when science is at its greatest promise to develop new vaccines for many devastating infectious diseases. The innovation ecosystem needs to be more tightly linked and aligned. For physicians and nurses, it's about working to educate parents and patients, having informed conversations that address concern and lay out the facts early in the process of decision-making. For regulatory agencies and recommending bodies, it's about ensuring there is greater alignment of health priorities. In the US, FDA and CDC working together to allow development of vaccines that not only will get approved, but will be recommended for broad use to address public health need. Otherwise, it would be a waste of thousands of people that have spent endless hours to try and bring this new science forward and want to make it available to the broader need in society. We have seen the CDC react heroically to the opioid public health emergency and Ebola outbreaks. The same sense of urgency and the use of a proactive interaction with the scientific community and companies involved in vaccines is needed to accelerate and also to counter vaccine skepticism. And for industry and academia, it's about finding ways to collaborate to bring forward the next generation of vaccines and vaccine science. Just think about what we could accomplish if we set forth a moonshot of vaccines, not only advancing the science, but raising the profile of vaccines research and signaling to the next generation of scientists that this is a vital area to pursue a scientific career in. And ultimately, again, we need a society that appreciates the value of vaccines, the cost savings it brings to the healthcare system, but of course, most importantly, the impact these remarkable breakthrough products can have on people's lives across all ages, from birth to later in life, and that allow us to forget diseases, to put to rest the terrible suffering that can come from many infectious diseases. Let's be louder than the few naysayers that unfortunately seems to have a very loud voice. We have risen to challenges before. We can do it again at a time when science is most promising. And I would hope that this meeting at Research America could be a starting point for reigniting vaccine research and the role vaccine can play to help combat infectious disease and the threat of antimicrobial resistance. Thank you for your attention.